at the end of the day, cybersecurity is about people who are working to protect what we value most. Those four things, which we call cyber hygiene, actually prevent up to 98% of cyber attacks. AI will help us detect threats before they actually occur. It'll help us identify vulnerabilities that no human could ever do. It helps us deploy countermeasures in milliseconds. How many people have sang on your podcast before?
This is first time ever.
Right? If they are treating it as an IT thing and not a strategic priority, it is at their peril.
Hi and welcome to Agoria's podcast, Return on Responsibility. In this episode, we focus on cybersecurity. And obviously that's no coincidence, because if there is one keyword that dominates the news today, it is all about security. We focus on how our companies can remain economically resilient in a difficult geopolitical context. And we ask ourselves, what about our cyber resilience in this digitally connected economy? And we'll discuss these and other questions with Jen Easterly. Jen is really one of the leading American authorities on cybersecurity, on critical infrastructure protection, and on national security in general. And until the beginning of 2025, she headed the US Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. And believe it or not, she worked twice directly for the White House, under George W. Bush and under Barack Obama. And besides this, Jen is really a decorated Army officer. That's what I call an impressive CV. Important for today, she's known not only for her strategic insights, but also for her very pragmatic approach to cybersecurity. So Jen, welcome on the podcast. What's the one thing about cybersecurity that still gets your blood pumping up after all these years?
Yeah, well, everything about cybersecurity gets me excited. Look, at the end of the day, people look at cybersecurity and they find it scary and way technical. And at the end of the day, cybersecurity is about people, right? It's about a community, a team of cyber defenders who are working to protect what we value most, our businesses, our families, our institutions, our values. It's a fantastic mission. And right now, we're at an inflection point where we have an opportunity to use some of the emerging technologies that are now available, specifically generative AI, to secure our digital world in a way that we've never had before, to build security into the DNA of our businesses and our infrastructure, and use that to inspire the next generation of cyber defenders who are going to do this not because it's a job, but because it's a calling. So there's a lot to be excited about, Bart.
And we'll talk a lot about all these elements as well.
I look forward to it.
Before we do so, perhaps let's also take a brief look at the current state of Europe and have your view also on it. Yeah. Because in Europe, cybersecurity, Europe has introduced several initiatives, such as the NIS2 directive, the Cyber Resilience Act, both in effect since the end of 2024. Their goal is to enhance the cybersecurity of digital products and software within the EU. Their goal is also to foster European collaboration and prompt key sectors to take action. So, as usual, we're leading in establishing a regulatory framework for cybersecurity. And I think it's necessary because in 2024, European companies were massively targeted by cyber attacks with not only an increase in frequency, but also in scale and in impact. So for most of the companies, the question is no longer if a cyber attack will happen, but more when it will happen. And if you look into the European companies, 71% of them see, and that's a good thing, see cybersecurity as a high priority. Same figure applies also for Belgium. But and this brings us perhaps at the heart of the matter, only 25% of these companies are actually taking action. Despite these undeniable numbers, many businesses, they still think they are
Let's
safe.
use this podcast to change that, Bart.
Well, that's the goal. Because even for our CEOs, it's true.
Yeah.
A lot of CEOs still are easy targets to publicly visible vulnerability.
Yeah.
So what do you think about the European situation?
Well, look, you mentioned the NIS2 directive
Yes.
and the Cyber Resilience Act. I think those are incredibly important. Look, I've said we spend too much time blaming employees and organizations for falling victim to a cyber attack. Yes, CEOs need to prioritize cybersecurity. They need to build a culture of cybersecurity responsibility and awareness to help drive down risk. But at the end of the day, a lot of the responsibility is found up the supply chain to the technology vendors who for decades have been allowed to develop and deliver insecure, deflective, flawed software that prioritizes speed to market and features over security. And frankly, that's why we have a cybersecurity industry. When I was at CISA, one of the key initiatives that we championed was called Secure by Design, which was a whole effort to get software vendors to build software that was resilient to the most common types of attacks. Well, the exciting thing is, here in Europe, with the Cyber Resilience Act in particular, the EU is actually leading the world in turning secure by design from a grand ambition to a legal requirement. So I think that's one of the most important things that can help shape a more secure technology ecosystem.
And do you see that already in the products that are being developed here in Europe?
I think it's driving in that direction, right? Came into effect in 2024. So this is about shaping the ecosystem. This is about preparing those software vendors who know they have to meet certain standards. And at the end of the day, it's about changing the behavior on the supply side, but it's also about changing the behavior on the demand side. Anybody that buys and uses software
Should
to
expect
include,
this.
exactly, but corporate leadership at all levels need to demand that the products that they get are built to be secure. So you've got to change it on both sides. It's going to take a little time, but it's one of the things I'm excited about because I think AI can make a difference there.
And going back perhaps on what are then these security features that are still often missing in products?
Yeah, I mean, the basics at the end of the day are things like what we call multi-factor authentication. So two-factor authentication, it's enabling you not just using your username and your password, but another factor that helps to secure your data much more effectively. You know, there are four basic things that we talk about. It's multi-factor authentication, it's strong, differentiated passwords, and a password manager. It's keeping your software updated, and then it's having your employees understand how to recognize and report phishing. Those four things, which we call cyber hygiene, actually prevent up to 98% of cyber attacks. And so if you only do those four things, you're actually doing the blocking and tackling to make yourself less of a target. And that's where some of the small and medium enterprises that don't have large security teams, that's where I always advise that they focus. And you should do all four, but if you only do one, enable MFA.
Okay, but we'll come back on that, but let's perhaps come back to Europe as well. So what do you think are the domains where Europe can still improve?
Look, I mean, the great thing about what Europe can do is to set global standards, right? What they're doing, what you're doing with the Cyber Resilience Act.
That's sometimes why we're criticized as well on.
Well, let me come back to that, right? You think about GDPR as well, helping on the privacy side. Now, there's a lot of arguments out there that regulations and setting standards kill innovation, and that's why Europe doesn't have the sort of Silicon Valley equivalent of tech companies. I frankly think, Bart, it's less about that. I think it has more to do with the fragmentation and the lack of a single digital market. I think it has to do with underdeveloped capital markets. I think it has to do with punitive bankruptcy laws that really deter risk-taking. I think it has to do with immigration policies that don't necessarily welcome talent from around the world. And, it has to do with labor market. So I don't think we should
to speak
blame.
like I do. So my speech is basically
Well, there
about
you go.
competitiveness.
Rock
It's all
on,
about
brother.
that.
Look, at the end of the day, I don't think we should look at regulation as evil. I think if you do regulation in a smart way, if it's harmonized, I think it can actually spur innovation. I mean, again, GDPR, privacy-enhancing technologies. You look at automobile, like EVs, electric vehicles came out of some of the, the Clean Air Act in the U.S. I mean, there's all kinds of positive things that, from an innovation perspective, that come out of security regulations. And I'm really hoping that the CRA helps us drive a more secure technology ecosystem. And I think we should be excited about it.
And can the US learn something from Europe from that perspective?
Yeah, I mean, in the way that GDPR is driving privacy and privacy-enhancing technologies, I think the CRA can drive more secure software because these companies are multinational. So, all that said, Bart, I personally have been pushing for a software liability regime, one that's rooted in an articulable standard of care, and one that frankly has safe harbor provisions for those companies that responsibly innovate by using secure development practices. So these are things that are being actively discussed within the U.S. as well. But I think we should take a page from what the EU is doing on the CRA.
Oh, gives a new perspective, I think, to a number of European companies. Now, nevertheless, if you look around, a lot of the software products we're using ourselves here in Europe are built by American companies, basically. And so you were touching on the movement around security by design. Do you feel like these American companies are doing what is necessary, or do you think European companies could do things faster, or how do you look into that?
Well, look, many of these companies are global companies, right? They may be based in America, but they have huge global customer bases. And across the board, I mean, if you just look at this, why are we at where we're at? It's because of about 40 years of misaligned economic incentives and a lack of software liability. That is basically all across the world to all companies. And what that's ended up in is, again, prioritization of features and speed to market over security. So you end up with bolt-on cybersecurity solutions. So you have defective and flawed and insecure technology that has created the cybersecurity industry.
But how would you then tackle the ideas? The cybersecurity that you know today is probably not the one that you will know in a year, 2 years, 3 years from here.
Yeah.
As a designer, as a developer, how do you tackle that?
Well, so a couple different things. So developers now actually are able to use AI to help them code more securely. So there are tools now that can help create prospectively more secure code, which is a positive thing. I'm pretty excited about being able to use AI retrospectively to actually refactor and translate legacy code into more secure code. So that's on the positive side, right? And that's happening within the industry. And that's from a technical perspective. But I also think this policy angle that's helping to drive more secure technology because of the standards that are being put in place. So there's two of these levers happening, both of which can help to shape a more secure technology ecosystem. And it's one of the reasons why I'm excited. We're never going to get perfect cybersecurity. We're never going to get it down to zero vulnerabilities. But I do think working on the supply side with the vendors and on the demand side with the customers, with businesses at all levels making cybersecurity a leadership priority, I do think we can get to a much safer and more secure and more resilient place.
Speaking a bit more on artificial intelligence, are there other examples that you see where AI could play in this area of cybersecurity?
Yeah. So, and let's just Let's just stipulate there are a lot of concerns about AI from a security perspective as well.
The news is full of it.
We can talk about some of them. But I do think there is a lot to be excited about. Look, I fell in love with technology as a young lieutenant colonel in the Army when I saw how we could use technology to save lives. That's why I got into this business. And so I do believe that this technology, it is going to be the most powerful capability of our lifetimes, and it is going to change how we do most things, to include how we can secure our digital world, right? AI will help us detect threats before they actually occur. It'll help us identify vulnerabilities that no human could ever do. It helps us deploy countermeasures in milliseconds and learn from every attempt to breach those countermeasures. And as I said, I believe it will help us refactor legacy code and very vulnerable code into much more secure code.
Would that equally be true? Because sometimes you hear about the manufacturing industry when you're talking about technology that is software that is running on older machines, on robots. Would that be equally true on these machine tools, basically?
I think so. I mean, they're talking about AI curing cancer. So I think we can figure out how to refactor legacy code. It's a big problem.
That could be an enormous productivity improvement.
That's what I'm saying, right? Exactly. So you think about just broadly as a use case, not to get too geeky with your audience, but there's something called memory safety. Right.
Okay.
So 70% of software vulnerabilities are as a result of what's called memory safety issues. And so if you think about being able to remove entire classes of vulnerabilities, 70%, that's quite a lot. And some of that is because of coding in old coding languages, C and C++. Mm-hmm. So your computer scientists who are out there will know there's now what's called memory safety languages. So think about if you can use generative AI to translate code from legacy like C and C++ into memory safe code, you can create more performant code, to be honest, but you can also create safer code. So that is one use case that I am very excited about.
Oh, super.
It is super.
Super. You mentioned earlier in the discussion also SMEs, smaller companies, and something that is also triggering my mind sometimes. If you look on what investments companies need to make to be cyber safe, also to invest in new technologies, how are smaller companies going to do this, and what can you advise them?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really important question. And when I was at CISA, we spent a lot of time on this because within the U.S., 99.9% of businesses are small businesses, right? With a median size of 11 people. And
that's not so different here.
Yeah. And so at the end of the day, what you want to do is help these companies that have none or an outsourced cybersecurity team. What are the basics that they need to do? So, Bart, I already talked about one of it. We created a whole public service awareness campaign called Secure Our World. And it was all about helping everybody, I'd like to say from K through Gray, understand the steps that they need to take to stay safe online, keep themselves, their families, their businesses. And that goes back to MFA, passwords, phishing, and keeping your software up.
The basic hygiene.
The basic hygiene stuff.
Perhaps you should repeat that because you cannot repeat enough, I think, what people can do as a basic hygiene.
And we can make the website available because we did all these cartoons and short films. I did a music video. So it's the 4 steps.
A music video?
Yeah. You want to hear them? Do you want to hear the 4 steps? Do you want to hear me sing them?
Oh, yeah, with pleasure.
All right, yeah.
Go.
It's install your updates, make better passwords, think before you click, and use multiple factors. Pretty good. How many people have sang on your podcast before?
This is
first time ever,
I think.
First time
fantastic.
Yeah.
Don't ask me to sing it.
You got to make it easy for people to understand, right, at the end of the day. And so we tried to create these ways that made people sort of say, okay, this is easy stuff. I can figure out how to do it. So that's one big thing, the basics of cyber hygiene that prevents 98% of cyber attacks. Number 2, cybersecurity performance goals. So a lot of times people refer to you to the NIST cybersecurity framework. A lot of businesses will recognize that. And that's great, sort of considered the gold standard, but it's hundreds and hundreds of things. If you're a small or medium enterprise, you don't know what to do with that. It ends up sitting on a shelf. And people may say we're aligned with the NIST cybersecurity framework, but you actually get lost in the noise. And so we created something called the Cybersecurity Performance Goals. It wasn't 100 things. It was less than 40 things characterized by cost, complexity, and impact, specifically to help businesses identify and materially reduce cyber risk. So I always recommend that, even to some of the big businesses, because within your big business, you might have within your supply chain many small and medium entities. And it's really important that you have a way to judge your vendor risk.
And leadership, it's the obvious thing.
Yeah.
How easy do you find it to get the CEOs on board?
More and more.
More and more, that's a good thing.
I mean, we live in a world where there's a cyber attack every 30 seconds, where the average data breach costs over $5 million, with some costing into the billions, and where global cybercrime damages are expected to cost the world $10.5 trillion by the end of this year. So if cyber Crimea was a country, its gross domestic product would be the fourth in the world after the US, China, and the European Union. So businesses realize that this creates significant risk, and that if they are treating it as an IT thing and not a strategic priority, it is at their peril. And so more and more, I see CEOs really embracing cyber risk as an existential business risk. But Bart, I spend a lot of time talking with business leaders about specifically what they can do. And it's not rocket science. You know, it's the basics of making leadership, making cybersecurity a leadership priority, building a culture of cybersecurity awareness, using your procurement dollars to drive better security, focusing on resilience, not prevention, and then embracing collaboration and partnership with trade associations and with your government and with your sector and your industry. Those basic things can actually help turn your cybersecurity program into a competitive advantage.
So we have all our role to play.
All our role to play.
There's one topic that I'm always asking, talent. I am a firm believer of talent that makes a difference. I know in your previous job, you have been pushed as well to hire a lot of talent. How do you look into, here in Europe, we're always missing talent. How do you cope with that?
Yeah, it was crazy. So when I came into CISA, we actually had 1,000 open positions. 1,000 open positions.
Wow.
And so very quickly, I had to figure out how I was going to attract incredible technical talent to deal with some of the most serious threats to the nation. And part of it was removing the bureaucracy. How could we more quickly bring people in, and actually how we could pay them more, a little closer to market. But the key thing, Bart, was really the culture. It was creating that culture that was going to attract the best and the brightest from universities, from the private sector, from other places in government to do this really important mission. And so one of the first things we did was creating a culture that was around collaboration, innovation, service, accountability, but one that really championed innovation and entrepreneurialism and experimentation. And so when we tried to bring in talent, it wasn't all about technical aptitude. It was also about, are you a team player? How are you going to work with partners? Because CISA, at the end of the day, was a voluntary agency. We were not a regulator. We didn't do law enforcement. We weren't military. It was all about working with our partners. Partners, the vast majority of critical infrastructure is owned and operated by the private sector. And you can be the most technically competent person in the world, but if you're a jerk and people don't want to work with you, then you're not going to be successful in that organization. So it was really about laying out the principles of the kind of people we want to bring in, people who always do the right thing, who lead with empathy, who always want feedback, who are continuous learners. So at the end of the day, you have to create the right organizational culture to be able to build a team of excellence.
Super. And tell me the secret. how do you attract more female experts into the team?
Yeah.
Here in Belgium, it is really an issue. We're making progress, but I can use all the tricks, you know.
Yeah. Well, it helps to be a woman, first off, because,
Helps a lot.
you know, if you can see it, you can be it, as they say. You know,
The role model, basically.
Yeah, but, you know, I started off just after my 18th birthday. I went to the United States Military Academy at West Point. That was just 10 years after women were first allowed to go to West Point. And there were only 9% women.
9%.
9%. And so I've known from a very young age what it's like to operate in a highly male-dominated field. Now, there are more than that in cybersecurity. They're about 24% women, but I really focused on trying to make women excited about getting involved in the field of cybersecurity. So spent time with Girls Who Code, a great organization, with Women in Cybersecurity, another great organization, even with the Girl Scouts, because you've got to start them very young.
Very young.
And so, you know, and I actually set a goal to get to 50% women in cybersecurity by the year 2030. And that's very aspirational, but you have to be aspirational.
Absolutely.
You have to be aspirational to achieve your goal. And look, just to be clear, this is not about creating diversity for diversity's sake. Actually, I strongly believe that teams that have more diverse people from different backgrounds, different education, different genders, you have diversity of thought, and that's how you solve your most complex, challenging problems. You don't want everybody to look alike because you end up in this world of groupthink. And so I worked very hard. One of our key core principles of culture was to foster an environment of belonging and diversity and inclusion.
Super. Good advice. Thank you.
100%.
Just one, your personal cybersecurity, seeing you're the expert, that's the best on earth, I assume?
Well, as soon as you think you're the best on earth, that's when you get popped, Bart. So nobody out there should think that. You know, you have to tailor your own cybersecurity to your threat model. So CEOs, key business people out there, you're probably a high target, and you should do all of the basic things that you need to do. Strong password manager, differentiated passwords for all your accounts that you care about, financial data, medical records, photos, media or social media, your email. Very important, use a strong password manager. You know, make sure that you've updated all your software on all your devices. Set those automatic updates. Multi-factor authentication, you can use hardware tokens. That's what I use. I use advanced password protection. So, you know, I'm never going to say that I'm bulletproof, but I do everything I can to protect myself and my data and my privacy and my family.
Thanks for the advice. Thank you. I give you one more task before we end the podcast. We're going to ask that to all our guests. We'll give you a pitch of 1 minute. And in this 1 minute, I would like you to say, why should companies see cybersecurity as a unique business opportunity instead of a complex technical challenge?
Yeah. So this is Agoria Shark Tank.
You go for it.
Every 30 seconds, somewhere in the world, a business falls victim to a cyber attack. In just the time it took to do this podcast, over 50 organizations will be compromised. That is the reality that we face in 2025. So the fundamental question is, in a world of constant cyber attacks, how does your business not just survive? How does it thrive? In my experience, it comes down to two things: leadership and culture. Leaders that understand that cyber risk is an existential business risk and build a culture of corporate cyber responsibility that manages cyber risk as a matter of good governance. Both of these things require a mindset shift from thinking about cybersecurity as a cost center to thinking about it as a competitive advantage. Because those companies that embrace cybersecurity as a business catalyst, those are the companies that win. The companies that don't do that get left behind by investors and partners and customers that demand trust and resilience. So again, the companies that embrace cybersecurity as a business catalyst are the ones that will shape the future. And as we know, the future is being written today.
Wow. Well said. Thanks for joining us, Jen. It was really a true pleasure of having you on the podcast. Thank you very much. So like Jen said, there are many threats, but there are also many opportunities to build a safer, stronger digital world. I've learned a lot in this podcast, and especially that cybersecurity can also be a productivity win. I will be spreading the word on that one. Thanks for joining us, and make sure to tune in for the next episode.